Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar, Why All the Fuss About Agile? The purpose of today's webinar is to give people an understanding of why the need for Agile, what are the major benefits and risks of an Agile approach, and what's happening in the industry in terms of choosing Agile and putting it on projects. So we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about that as well. This is going to be scheduled as a 45-minute webinar. There will be time for questions at the end. So during the webinar, if you have questions, please type them into the questions window on the web interface, and we will address them at the end of the event. Everybody is currently on mute, and we shall now proceed with going through the materials. So my name is Kevin Aguanno. I've been in the Agile community since its start, since the early days of the Agile community, before we even called it Agile in the early to mid-90s, and certainly been one of the pioneers in this area, focusing on Agile project management, how to put structure and discipline around Agile while still allowing some flexibility and adaptiveness to be responsive to changing needs. I've got lots of certifications, certainly all the major Agile certifications, and traditional project management certifications as well. I'm tied into all the various professional societies and associations, so I can really represent both the Agile side and the non-Agile traditional project management side as well. So today I'm going to be talking about these topics. The first thing I want to talk about is, why do we need Agile in the first place? And you may have heard the Gartner Group over the last 3 years or so, three and a half years, has been talking about the need for bimodal IT. Now, for those of you not in the IT industry, just bear with me on this example for a moment. But Gartner Group has been talking about the need for bimodal IT. And there's lots of expensive courses and conferences and things you can go to get an understanding of that. But I can simplify it in just a couple minutes. What they're really saying is that if you imagine there is a spectrum of ways in which we could approach projects, we put them all on a spectrum. At one end, you would have very disciplined, structured, plan-based waterfall approaches. We call those defined approaches. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, we would have the exact opposite approaches, the ones that are very flexible and adaptive and empirical, such as Agile. That's another an example of an empirical method. So at one end of the spectrum, you might have defined or waterfall methods. At the other end of the spectrum, you'd have empirical or Agile methods. Now, there's many other approaches along the way. Every project, when it starts, should best be placed along this spectrum to understand where the project lies and find the nearest management technique to deal with that project. If we only had one method, it doesn't matter if it's waterfall or Agile, if you only had one method, then a project that appears at that end of the spectrum, the same end of the spectrum as that method, would be managed with the ideal approach for that type of project, not a problem. But if you imagine a project appears at the opposite end of the spectrum, but we only have this one approach to deal with projects, then you may have to round it all the way down to the nearest method, which is the only one you have, which is at the opposite end. And what you would end up doing is managing the project with the exact opposite approach that one would if you could be a little bit more idealistic or optimize it. The idea being that if you only have one methodology, want to approach every project, some projects will fit that methodology and some will be a horrible fit for that methodology. And we see that often with troubled projects. Many times a project gets into trouble because it's being managed with the wrong approach. What bimodal IT is saying is that you need at least one method at each end of the spectrum. When a project appears somewhere along the way, we round it to the nearest approach, either up to one approach or down to the other. But the idea is that with a couple different approaches to choose from, we can have a better chance at optimizing. So if you think about it for a moment, if a project appears near the Agile end, we could manage it with Agile and be very efficient with that approach. As opposed to one appearing at the opposite end, we could manage it with the waterfall method and be very efficient in that direction. So Gartner Group is saying with bimodal IT, you need one methodology at each end of the spectrum so that you can try and be efficient with your project delivery. Looking at this diagram on the screen, we're really talking about the difference between defined and empirical approaches. A defined approach is an approach where you can plan out the project in great detail. You've got lots of experience doing this kind of project, so you can come up with something pretty close to the perfect plan. These projects are characterized by enormous amounts of time gathering requirements and doing design, and lots of time estimating and planning, all up front, all at the start of the project, in an effort to build this theoretical perfect plan. Then, once you start the work, you just stick to the plan. We've heard terms like plan the work, work the plan. That's really focusing on a defined process mentality. Other projects, though, may not fit that plan very well. For example, you may get a request from your stakeholders. I'll know what I want when I see it. Or let's get started on the stuff we know while we try to figure out the rest. Those are very real project requests, but they don't fit the defined process model at all. You can't build the perfect plan when you're not even sure what the scope is yet. What happens when these projects arise, it's like shooting a bullet at a moving target. With traditional target shooting, if we spend enough time gathering requirements and doing design, we're clarifying the view of the target so we can see the bullseye. And if we spend enough time estimating and planning, we're aiming our rifle at that bullseye. When we got the right plan, we're pointing right at the bullseye. We pull the trigger, the bullet leaves the rifle. Now my project's in flight, and it's just going to follow that plan, follow that aim until it hits the bullseye. That's a defined process world, and it works really well with stable, stationary targets. But if you have a moving target, then you're constantly re-aiming, 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 and what you're really doing is replanning, re-estimating, gathering new requirements, clarifying the design, and that constant churn, that constant change drives waste. In fact, many projects get stuck in the requirements phase because it's constantly moving and they're constantly replanning, and they never feel confident that the plan or the target is going to stay still enough for them to bother pulling the trigger. So we need a better approach. Other projects will never have a clear view of the scope at the start. These are the ones where people say, let's get started on the stuff we know while we figure out the rest. So the idea of coming up with a complete set of requirements, a complete view at the beginning is false. It won't happen. So what we try to do in those projects is get started on the stuff we know, start moving towards the target, and then as the details start to emerge, as we get clearer view of the scope, the change starts to settle, we start to get clarity. At that point, we can adjust our aim to achieve the target. But the problem is that doesn't work when you're shooting bullets. You can't change the direction of a bullet once it's been fired. But you can do that with a cruise missile. So for these projects with high levels of change, we don't shoot bullets at them, we launch cruise missiles. And the differences between a bullet and a cruise missile are many: size, weight, price. But there's really two that are key for my example here. One is you can steer a cruise missile in flight. So as you get closer and closer to the target and the details emerge, you can fine-tune your aim so to make sure that you hit that target with one missile rather than shooting lots of random bullets at moving targets hoping one day you'll hit them. So this is an empirical approach, which is adaptive and adjusting. We observe where we are, and we adjust and adapt and get the missile back on course. Agile is an example of an empirical approach. So it's designed for projects with fuzzy scope or changing scope. It allows us to fine-tune and adjust. Another big difference between bullets and cruise missiles is that for a bullet to be successful, it has to hit the bullseye. So Waterfall, which is a defined method, seeks the perfect set of requirements, the perfect design, the perfect estimates, the perfect plan, but then it also looks for perfect execution. All of our metrics in Waterfall are measuring variance from plan. It's all about achieving this perfect plan, so it's trying to look for perfect execution. Empirical methods, though, are a little bit different. It's not shooting a bullet at the target, it's launching a cruise missile. And for a cruise missile to take out the target, I don't have to hit the bullseye. I just have to land it somewhere nearby and the blast will take out the target anyway. So empirical methods are saying that perfect execution isn't necessary. What I need is an execution that's good enough. Now, how do you determine good enough? Well, that's based on a more nuanced understanding of the business case, right? Does it have to be done exactly on time? Or is there some variability allowed in the schedule? Does it have to do all of the scope, or are there must-haves, should-haves, and nice-to-haves? And similarly with budget, is there some flexibility, plus or minus 10% or something in the budget? If there's a bit of flexibility in one of those, then you can start to look at empirical methods as an approach instead of defined methods. Looking at the diagram, what this is saying is on really low complexity, low change, easy projects, it doesn't matter which methodology you use, you got a fairly high chance of success. Because if it's easy, it's easy. And as the level of complexity increases, the level of change and risk increases, naturally your chance of success is going to fall. What's interesting is that defined methods drop quickly because your target moves, your bullets are going to miss. In empirical methods, the chance of success drops, but it drops more slowly because that cruise missile can adjust and adapt as time passes. So what we're saying is there's a better chance of using empirical methods over defined methods as we start getting into the moderate to higher levels of change on our projects. Let's take one more view. We're going to click down one level deeper. There's really not just two ways of structuring a project, right? Defined or empirical. There's actually 4 ways of structuring any project. 4 different ways of organizing, categorizing our work. Waterfall, iterative, incremental, and agile. And these methods are all very different. Oftentimes people use iterative and incremental terms interchangeably, and they should stop. They're very different concepts. Waterfall is a very linear sequential process. So say I was building a public park, and I had 3 groups of features, feature set A, B, and C. Then in Waterfall, I would do the requirements of A, B, and C in the first couple weeks. The next couple weeks, I might do the design of A, B, and C. Somewhere around the start of month 2, I would start building A, B, and C. And near the end of month 3, I would test or inspect A, B, and C. And the idea is that the park would open with a big grand ribbon-cutting ceremony at the end of month 3. Now, the waterfall method has 2 key weaknesses. One of them is feedback. I get feedback at the very end. Just when we thought we were done, we now turn to our stakeholders during user acceptance, and we ask them to verify if we got it right. We ask for their feedback. We ask for their sign-off. Now, hopefully they say yes, but they might have other feedback for us. They might say, oh, that reminds me I forgot something. So that's a new feature request. They might find a defect we missed. They might say that's what I said, but not what I meant. So we're going to start getting feedback during acceptance at the end of the waterfall project when we were pretty much out of time and money, and now we get all the feedback. So it means the project's deadline has to stretch, the budgets have to increase. We're almost guaranteed to be late and over budget if we get feedback at the end during acceptance. So one of the weaknesses of waterfall is we get feedback too late to do anything about it without impacting the project success criteria. Another weakness of waterfall is quality. If I'm inspecting my park, you know, out of a 3-month project, how much time would I spend on testing and inspection? Well, on a 3-month project, realistically, you know, the first month is going to be taken with requirements and design work. You're probably going to get about, you know, you plan for maybe 6 weeks of build work and a couple weeks of testing and verification and fixing defects. But practically speaking, you know what happens. The project starts late. They're not going to move the end date. What do? Cut corners on testing. Or the build takes longer than expected. So what do? We cut corners on testing. So very commonly, testing gets crunched. So instead of 2 weeks, we might end up with only a week, which is pretty realistic on a 3-month project. If I had a week of testing, say day 1 I found some defects, day 2 people went and fixed those defects, day 3 we had to verify that those defects were corrected, I bet you those defects were blocking further testing. So maybe day 4 and 5, the last 2 days of the project, we're testing things for the first time. What happens if I find a defect? There might not be time left to fix all those defects within my timeline. So we could get crunched on quality. We may have to make the decision, do I launch on time with existing defects, with known defects, or do I go late and over budget and fix the defects, but then I'm late? We may be put between that rock and a hard place, forced to make that difficult decision. And that's one of the problems with Waterfall that makes it what we call a low quality approach. Waterfall does not focus on quality as much as some of the other methods. That doesn't mean we build garbage products with Waterfall. It means there's not enough focus on testing and quality as some of the other methods do. So if my team has exceptionally high levels of skill and experience, I can build something pretty close to perfect on the first pass in Waterfall. It's okay that there's just a little bit of testing. There's not going to be any real defects. But if I'm suspicious about the level of quality that the team is going to be able to produce, maybe because of past experience with these team members or this vendor, or I'm using brand new technologies that are yet to be proven stable, Waterfall is very likely to put me in that position where I'm stuck and I have to decide, am I going to launch my product or my project, finish my project with bad quality, or do I fix the quality issues and be late and over budget? So those are the two weaknesses of Waterfall: late feedback and little focus on quality. The other methods address these slightly differently. Iterative starts with a model or a prototype of a product and slowly grows it into the finished product. So during month one, I would mock up my park. I would do drawings and sketches and an artist's rendition of the playground and what it looks like, and maybe architect's version of a view of the bridge. So detailed engineering drawings of the bridge showing the thickness of the beams needed and the angles to be cut and how many rivets we need to hold it together, whatever. That would all be inside the diagrams and views of the bridge design. The park might just have overall, for the landscaping, we might just have a site plan for the park. Where are the flower beds? What varieties are in them? And we review those models before we go do any work. Because if there's a discrepancy, we can just fix it. It's just a diagram or a sketch on paper. There's no material been ordered yet. No work has been done yet. So it's very easy and cheap to make changes at that point when it's just ink on paper. So we revise our models, get our feedback, and then month two, I show the revised view of those models, because there's no point starting any work until we agree. And we keep revising the models over and over until it's ready, time to build something, in which case we go and design, build, and test the stuff that was in the models. Very much like Waterfall, it's still a long process with just a little bit of testing at the end. But what happens at the beginning is there's more flexibility for scope and design. We're working with sketches and drawings. We can sketch and adjust and make changes to get feedback. The idea is the project is broken down into something called iterations. Here on this diagram, I have 3 one-month iterations, and we work on A, B, and C in each of those months, in each of those iterations. In the real world, I wouldn't just have 3. I'd have 8 or 10 or 15 or 20 iterations if I'm using an iterative approach. The idea being that at the end of month one, I've done a little bit of work on a design or sketch or draw what I think you meant with those requirements, and then that we sit down and we discuss, is this what you had in mind? So we're trying to validate that we're on the same page, we're in the same headspace, we're thinking of the same solution, our visions are aligned. And we also ask for change requests. Do you have any change requests yet? Even though this might be exactly what you asked for, maybe our needs have changed. So now's the time to introduce a change request early in the process. It's going to be much cheaper to implement the change now and avoid all the costly rework than what would happen in Waterfall, is you tend to get all the change requests late, around the time of acceptance testing or near the end, at the most costly, most expensive time. So here we're flushing the changes out early and avoiding that costly rework in the first place. So during that end of iteration demo of our work in progress, we ask, requirements validation. Is this still what you have in mind? And then we ask for change requests. Are there any changes? And we can take those 2 pieces of input and revise our model for next time. And once we start to agree on things, we can start to work on them. For example, if at the end of month one they said A is what I wanted, B isn't quite what I wanted, it's close, but there's some changes, and C, that's not even what I had in mind, it's completely wrong. Then at the end of month one, in parallel with revising my model of A, B, and C during month two, I can probably start doing some work on A, because they said that was essentially correct. B was mostly correct, so I can probably work on parts of B during month two, But I wouldn't start C yet at all because we're not in agreement. So that's how iterative works. Incremental is based on the prioritization of my components A, B, and C. So if I'm looking at my park, maybe A is my landscaping, B is my carpentry work, and C is my other miscellaneous stuff, paving a pathway through the park and putting up signs and things like that. Then during month 1 with incremental, I might prioritize all my landscaping first. And I'll move my dirt and plant my grass, trees, and flowers, and that would be my scope for month 1. And at the end of month 1, A's done, finished. I could have a ribbon cutting ceremony and open the park. There's no playground yet. There's no bridge over the creek. There's no pathway through the park. But at least people could go for a walk. People can get some value out of the park by just having the grass, trees, and flowers. Then during month 2, I work on my next highest priority item. So A was my highest priority, the landscaping. B, my second priority item, might be my playground and my carpentry work. So during month 2, I would design, build, and test and inspect all of the carpentry related items. So the swing set, the jungle gym, the bridge over the creek, they would be the scope of month 2. Then I would confirm what the scope is for month 3, and at the start of month 3, I would record that. And we would document it and go do the work for month 3, which would be paving the path through the park and doing the grass, trees, and flowers. The idea is that I'm getting some benefits along the way from these interim work products. So I could take advantage of the park when it's just grass, trees, and flowers. At the end of month 2, I could take advantage of a broader view of the park because now there's a jungle gym and a swing set. I've got a playground open, so I can get additional use out of the park. At the end of month 3, I have the full park in place, so now I've got my maximum business value. But with incremental, I can get some benefits along the way. So that's one of its major benefits. Another major benefit of incremental is lower risk. I can do some experiments in month 1, not just build the high priority stuff, but I can do some experiments. Like if I'm not sure if the soil at the sides of the creek can support the bridge supports, then during month 1, while I'm moving the grass, trees, and flowers, I can do some soil sample studies on the sides of the creek where I was thinking of putting the bridge to see if the soil there can support the bridge. So I don't want to do A and B and then get to C and realize, oh no, I got to throw it all out and come out with a different approach because where I put the bridge isn't going to work. So we can do some testing in month 1, some experiments on C inside of A. While I'm doing month 1, while I'm working on A, I can do some prototypes or proof of concept for C to test whether it's really going to work for me when I get there. The idea being if there's a problem, I'd rather fail early and cheaply in month 1, and say, well, this isn't good, our bridge location's no good, let's go back to the drawing board, versus month 3, when you're in the middle of building the bridge and you realize it's not going to work. That's a costly, wasteful failure, as opposed to finding out right at the beginning that there's something wrong. So that's why we use month 1 as some prototypes and proofs of concept to validate my design decisions early in the project to spot potential future problems and deal with them quickly. Another benefit of the incremental approach is I'm testing all the way throughout. Not just like Waterfall where I test mostly just at the end. Incremental I'm testing already in month 1 and again in month 2 and again in month 3. So I'm testing all the way throughout the project, meaning I've got more time to find and fix defects, leading to a higher quality product. And also we do something called regression testing. If you notice, during month 1 I built and tested A. During month 2 I built B, but I had to retest A plus B because when I'm adding in my jungle gym and swing set, I have to go back and re-inspect the landscaping in case the contractors who were doing the carpentry work drove through a flower bed or backed into a tree or left ruts in the lawn. So while I'm inspecting their carpentry work, I have to go back and re-inspect the landscaping to make sure they didn't mess it up. And again in month 3, when the paving contractor comes in to pave the path through the park, not only are we inspecting the paving work to make sure it's acceptable, again, I got to go double check the landscaping in case they messed it up, and I may want to go check the jungle gym or the bridge to make sure that when they were paving, they didn't run their equipment into it and break it or drive a truck over the bridge and crack a beam or something like that. So my benefits from incremental are early delivery of value, early reduction in risk with all this prototyping and proofs of concept, and the ability to the ability to have much higher quality for this testing throughout and regression testing. I guess the fourth major benefit here also is the ability to efficiently cut scope. At the end of month 2 in a waterfall project, if we said we're running out of time and money, we're going to go over budget, we need to cut scope, we would try and cut C, my lowest priority items, but I've already done requirements of C, design of C, I may even have started building C, so descoping it there would be wasteful. Yet if we look at the incremental approach, at the end of month 2, I haven't even started anything on C yet. No requirements, no design. So if I wanted to descope C to stay on track on time and budget, then it would be a very efficient way of descoping with the incremental approach. So there's a number of benefits of using incremental instead of waterfall, primarily focused on those areas. So let's look at Agile. Agile is both iterative and incremental. It combines the two together. We get all the benefits of iterative and all the benefits of incremental. What we do is we break the project down into even smaller, more granular pieces. So A would be broken down into A1, A2, A3. B gets broken down into B1, B2, B3, and so on. Smaller, more granular pieces, and we prioritize them aggressively based on a number of criteria. So for example, one of the criteria we would use would be technical or logical dependencies. So say let's go to a software development example. If we're building Microsoft Word, A might be my basic features. Cut, copy, paste, file, open, close, save, print. So out of those, which one would come first? Which would be, from a technical dependencies perspective, which one comes first? Well, we can't print unless there's something to print. So printing would come later. File open and close is pretty important. I'd say it's more important than printing. However, what are you opening and closing? I still think what comes first would be cut, copy, paste, and getting some text on the screen. If we can do that, that would be A1. Then file open and closing and saving, that would be A2. And A3 would be printing. We'd leave that till last. So A, we might prioritize based on dependencies, technical dependencies. B was, say, a group of features to make things look pretty. Changing fonts, margins, bold, italic, inserting, changing colors, inserting photos. All of those beautification features would be B. So let's take a look at those. Which one of those would we put first? And in that case, instead of prioritizing based on dependencies, this group, let's prioritize based on risk. So let's just take 3 of them: changing fonts, changing margins, and bold, italic, and underline. Which one of those is the riskiest, is the hardest to do? Well, changing margins is pretty easy. You're just moving text around on the screen, so I'd put that last. That'd be B3. Changing fonts is pretty hard, but I would argue that bold, italic, and underline is even harder because it's like changing fonts in weird combinations. So instead of just saying all the text has to be Arial, you're saying this text needs to be italics, this text needs to be bold and italics, this one needs to be bold, italics, and underlined, this one just italics and underlined. There's so many different combinations that I would say B1 would best be served with doing the bold, italics, and underlined. Because if you can do that, then B2, changing fonts, should be a breeze, and B3, changing margins, would be the last. So B, we prioritize based on business value. Or sorry, risk, right? The riskiest ones. Let's do the risky ones first, which is bold, italic, and underlined. C, in that case, we would look at another group of features. Say these are the text manipulation features of Microsoft Word. So we'd have spell check, grammar check, and mail merge. Out of those 3, in this case, we're going to prioritize based on business benefits. Which of those 3 drives the greatest business benefits? Right? Mail merge, spell check, or grammar check? Well, everybody uses spell check, so I'd probably put that first. That would be C1. Grammar check would be C2, and mail merge would be C3. So if we do this right, if I prioritize correctly in little bits and pieces, then in month 1 I would build, test, and complete A1, B1, and C1. So I'd be able to cut, copy, paste, type, and get some text on the screen. That's A1. Bold, italicize, and underline it. That's B1. And then I'd be able to do a spell check on it. That's C1. At the end of that, I've got a little piece of my final solution that tests strategic areas across the solution. I've done my high business value stuff first. That's C1, spell check. I've done my risky stuff first to eliminate risk early in the process. That's B1. That's the bold, italic, and underline. And I've respected my dependencies because some things need other things to be done first. That's A1, that the cut, copy, paste, and getting some text on the screen. That piece of functionality is completed. So I'm already starting to test early on in this first month. All those 3 features have been tested. So I'm getting higher quality. The risky things have been moved first, like B1. So I'm getting risk out of the way. I'm maximizing my business value by getting C1 done first. Right, so I'm able to get some of my high priority business items first. I'm getting all the benefits of incremental, plus I'm starting to get some of the broader picture thinking of iterative. If you look back at this diagram, iterative looks at all of A, B, and C at the beginning. We haven't built anything yet. We're just sketching and drawing and trying to get on the same page, but with this broad, high-level, big picture thinking. Incremental gets less feedback because it's so focused on one little piece of the solution, just A, that it doesn't even worry about B and C yet. I'm so focused on a narrow piece that the feedback is of marginal use. But with Agile, I'm getting strategic pieces of A, B, and C, so I'm starting to stretch people into higher level thinking. So there's some benefits here from going Agile, and that I'm getting all the benefits of iterative and incremental together. Then in month 2, I add on A2, B2, and C2. In month 3, I do A3, B3, and C3. I still build Microsoft Word. It's just the idea is that I can get some benefits from working with pieces of it in a different fashion along the way. So by breaking it down into chunks, we're testing earlier, we're identifying problems earlier, we're validating our designs earlier. I could even launch earlier. I could use A1, B1, and C1 and put it into production, start to use it. It's not the full working product, but it's key strategic pieces of it. So here I could cut, copy, paste, type in some text, bold, italicize, and underline it, and I can do a spell check. Sure, I can't print yet, but what is this? This could be a blog editing tool. The idea is that I've got some capabilities here I can take immediate use of potentially. So Agile combines iterative and incremental to give us the best value we can out of the two of them. I see there's a potential question here. Somebody raised their hand. I'm just going to ask you to type your question in the questions window, and we'll deal with them at the end. So on high change projects, Agile is typically our best choice. It combines high efficiency, the ability to release a product in chunks, get some value to some sections earlier, along with high quality. Now in high change projects, quality is measured as meeting the changing requirements, and Agile is very adaptive and flexible to the change while still trying to be efficient. Iterative and incremental are decent alternatives depending on where your focus is. Incremental, if you need high efficiency, you need value in chunks, but the quality might be a little bit lower, a little bit less responsive to rapid change. Iterative, very responsive to rapid change, but it's typically a big bang deployment, right? We would hold on to the deliverables and release them at the end. So they'd be decent alternatives. Waterfall would be a poor choice for a high change project because you're basically shooting bullets at a moving target. It's a very wasteful process, very inefficient. But if we're looking at low change projects, Waterfall could be your best choice. On a low change project, we're going to change the definition of quality from meeting the changing requirements to the absence of defects, because frankly there are no changing requirements. So on these low change projects, Waterfall might be the best choice. It's my fastest, cheapest way to get that project done. However, it's low quality. It may have some defects. You may get stuck between a rock and a hard place, having to make those decisions. Do I release my product with known defects, or do I go late and over budget? You may get pushed in that tight position. If you need extra quality, if you need enhanced quality, it has to be done right because it's life or mission critical. Then even on a low change project, I might use Agile or incremental for all of their testing and retesting that goes on. You get a much higher quality product, but it's going to cost you more. It'll be less efficient. So you have to decide, do you want it fast and cheap, or do you want it more expensive but higher quality? So that's a little bit about the benefits and risks of using Agile. I want to go just a little bit more detail into some statistics here because it's nice in theory. Let's get some real data. Is Agile another fad? Well, quite a few years ago, in fact, 7, 8 years ago, this question was asked by the Agile Adoption Survey by Scott Ambler in Dr. Dobbs' journal. And the answer was that 2/3 of organizations, more than 2/3, had already adopted one or more Agile techniques, and the ones that hadn't yet adopted Agile, most of those had a plan to do so within the next couple of years. So you'll see that Agile isn't just a fad. Agile is mainstream. Major organizations are using it. On this chart, similar survey, most people that were using Agile stated that it actually improved their quality, improved their productivity. Agile actually improved productivity. The 6% that it said that they actually reduced productivity, in a follow-up question, they were asked, why is it reduced? They said, well, we're just starting Agile. This is just our first Agile project. It actually takes a little bit longer at first until you get the hang of it. Fair enough, there's a learning curve. But once you get the hang of it, you'll see improved productivity. You're going to see improved quality as well. With all that testing and retesting that goes on, quality tends to be significantly improved. But what about costs? Let's take a minute and look at this diagram and think about what it's saying about costs. What this is saying is that if we're doing the same project one way, one of them Agile, one of them non-Agile, how would the costs differ between these two projects? 40% of people said there was no change. Some said costs are slightly better, some say costs were slightly worse. Only 10% saw a significant difference in costs, but it was 10% higher, or 5% higher, 5% lower. This is basically telling you that Agile is not a cost play. You don't do Agile to save money. You do it to improve quality, reduce risk, all those other benefits we talked about. Let's move to the next screen. Business stakeholders are happier with Agile delivery because they're in control of steering the cruise missile. They're more likely to get what they actually need. I guess one of my final slides, this is perhaps the business case for going Agile in the first place. The Chaos report from the Standish Group, version 3, they asked 3,500 CIOs what percentage of features are actually being used in deployed applications. And the answer? 1/2 to 2/3 of features are never used or are rarely ever used in the deployed applications. Just by switching to an IID approach, you build things in order of priority. And at the beginning, we'd work on the things that we always need. Then later, we'd work on the things we often need. After that, we'd work on the things we sometimes need. And we'd probably stop there. We wouldn't bother work on the things that are rarely needed or are never needed, leading to significant changes. A follow-up question, they asked the CIOs, why is there so much waste in deployed applications? And the answer was interesting. They said, we use the waterfall method primarily, and in the waterfall method, we ask people to sign off on detailed requirements at the beginning before they're really sure what they want yet, because people's understanding of what they need matures or changes over time. If we get our stakeholders to sign off at the very beginning, and then we go into change prevention mode, right? Once these requirements are signed off, we try to discourage change because it's very disruptive to our projects. Business stakeholders have learned that it's very hard to introduce changes later on, so they throw everything on the requirements list at the beginning, whether they need it or not. Just in case, they better put it on the list. So we end up signing off on those requirements. Then we design a solution that meets all of those requirements, even the ones we don't really need yet. Then we build all of those requirements. We build that solution. Then we test that entire solution, and then we hand it to the business for sign-off, and they look at it and they say, hey, I was right. I didn't need all those requirements, but it's too late. We've spent all that time and money, and the waste is potentially huge. Here we're seeing half to 2/3. So just by switching to an agile approach and building things in chunks in order of priority, and starting with the things we always need and working our way around to the things we sometimes need, we're going to be avoiding the things we never need, and we'll save huge amounts of time and money. So while agile potentially is the same cost, there are no cost savings. That was the prior slide. That's only if you build the exact same scope between the agile and waterfall projects. But here, agile gives us the chance to efficiently cut scope, saving time and money. And if we take advantage of that, the savings can be significant. So getting back to my original question, why all the fuss about agile? Because it allows us to have increased efficiencies, it reduces risk, we get higher quality, we can get some pieces of the solution out the door faster so we can start capturing business value sooner. We get tremendous benefits from these agile approaches, any one of which would be enough possibly to justify the switch to this approach. So I want you to seriously consider these agile approaches as possibilities on your future projects. I showed you want to look at some different factors to consider which approach might be best. The same practices we already talked about. Do you need lots of feedback on your project? If the answer is yes, the scope is fuzzy, you need lots of validation, then you might want to use an iterative or agile approach, because that gives you lots of opportunities to review the work in progress with your stakeholders and get meaningful feedback. If the answer is no, my requirements are fairly stable, we know what we're doing, you might want to use waterfall or incremental. How do you choose between those approaches? Well, even if you say it's a high feedback project, the choices are agile or iterative. How do you choose? Well, look at your delivery strategy. Iterative is big bang, agile is phased delivery. Do you want to take advantage of this solution sooner, before the whole thing is completed? Then agile might be your best choice. Iterative only delivers things all together at the end. Another factor to look at is quality. Agile would be high quality, iterative would be a lower quality approach. So we want to look at the need for early delivery of value, look at the need for higher quality, and that would help us choose on both sides of that decision tree. So there's a number of factors to consider in choosing, but using those criteria, we can usually come up with a really good approach. Okay, what about your projects? Here's an opportunity. You can ask some questions. I'll answer your questions as best I can about the need for Agile in the first place. But before we do, while you're thinking of your questions, you can type them into the questions window on our chat interface. While you're typing those questions in, I have something for you to think about. I've given you just a very high-level cursory overview of what is Agile, how does it compare to the traditional approaches to delivering, what are some of the stats about what are the benefits are, trying to quantify some of those benefits, and even giving you some early thinking about when you might use Agile, what type of situations might make sense. But this is just a very quick 45-minute discussion on this. If you want more information on this, please go get additional training or read a book or something like that. I'm the author of over 30 books, audiobooks, and DVDs, etc., on project management and Agile-related topics. However, there are some awesome courses available from some local universities. If you're on the East Coast, go look at what Dalhousie University is doing. They're running an awesome 3-day Agile project management course. In addition to understanding more about Agile, it actually qualifies you for 3 certifications. At the end of the course, you can get the Scrum Master certification, you can apply to write the PMI Agile Certified Practitioner certification, and in class, you complete the Certified Agile PM certification. So at the end of that one class, you could generate 3 certifications. So certainly something to think about. Go to the Dalhousie Continuing Education website. I'm sure you'll find more information there. Now, at this point, I'm going to open this up for questions. Please type your questions into the chat window, and I'd be happy to answer them. First question is Agile just for software projects? Well, the answer is no. In fact, the examples I used, I was talking about parks and things like that. Agile is really meant for any project that's dealing with high levels of change or high levels of complexity that make it hard to manage or conceive of that project and work on it. You know, it allows us to control the complexity by working on the stuff we know while we figure out the rest. That's where it shines, is highly complex projects or high change projects. So that's something you might want to consider. I've done Agile in engineering and construction projects, in high-tech manufacturing and engineering and manufacturing projects, in business transformation, organizational change projects, mergers and acquisitions, all kinds of different projects completely outside of the IT space. So it's certainly being looked at seriously in many different areas now, although it got a big boost in the IT industry back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It got its big boost. Certainly some of the more interesting and highest growth in Agile recently has been in product development and other areas outside of IT. So certainly keep your mind open that there are these different approaches to structuring projects. It's not just a bimodal world. You actually have multiple approaches, including iterative and incremental, lots to choose from. And if you put those all on a spectrum and figure out where your project belongs on that spectrum, you choose the nearest methodology, you'll be quite successful. Any more questions? Please just type them into the chat window. Okay, somebody's asking about Agile certifications. There are multiple certifications out there in the Agile world. Some of them you'll hear about are the Scrum Master certification, have been around for quite a while. Some of them that are a bit newer, like the PMI Agile Certified Practitioner, which is the fastest growing certification PMI, or the Project Management Institute, has ever created. There's the Certified Agile Project Manager that's been around since 2006 or 8. It's actually started in Canada and has spread internationally. So that's another one that you might want to look at. There's Disciplined Agile Delivery has a certification, and there's now certification for SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprises. There's a number of certifications out there. Please take some of them with a grain of salt. Some individuals have created certification systems just as money makers for themselves. So really look at ones that are generated and run by nonprofit organizations that aren't controlled by the inventors of a methodology. That may help guide you into finding the ones that aren't rife with conflicts of interest. But certainly the ones that are both, the three that are best well known out there in the Agile space is the Scrum Master certification, the Agile PM certification, and the PMI ACP is starting to get better known, but it's still largely unknown among HR people or the business sponsors who are hiring people to run Agile projects. So I'd look at the Agile PM and the Scrum Master certification as a start. And if I have the time and money and inclination, I might look at the PMI Agile Certified Practitioner designation as well. Any more thoughts or questions? Suresh just asked about documentation. Is it true that in Agile projects you don't have to document? That's absolutely untrue. It's a big misunderstanding of one of the principles of Agile, which is focusing on efficiency. And if you're focusing on efficiency, documentation is an area where there could be some waste. What we don't want to do is do detailed documentation of stuff that's going to change later. So in Agile, we just do some high-level documentation first. So we document our requirements, for example, just at a very high level. And we do the detailed documentation just in time. Just as we're about to start a piece, that's when we do our detailed analysis and documentation of that piece, so we really understand what it is that we're doing. We don't do that detailed work too far in advance because we would waste time and money documenting things that'll change or go away later anyway, causing waste. So in the interest of efficiency, we do all the detailed work just in time. And we're also sensitive that we don't over-document. Don't create a 60-page document when a 20-page version will do, right? Use lots of bullet points and short forms, and don't write repetitive information or information that the average person wouldn't need to know. Put that stuff in an appendix so you don't force every reader to wade through all that unnecessary detail. So we're just focusing on efficiency and keeping it efficient, not only to write and edit, but for the reader to get in, find the information they need, and get back out. So a whole different approach to documentation. There's another question in here, and this is probably the last one I'm going to have time to take. Oh, is this a comment? Great presentation and very informative. Thank you very much, Rajiv, for that comment. Okay, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your time. If you wish to claim some PDUs for this, as a 45-minute presentation, you get 3/4 of a PDU. You would claim that under the Talent Triangle area for technical skills for this particular presentation. So 3/4 of a PDU under technical if you're a PMI project manager. If you're an IIBA certified business analysis professional, you can claim a CDU as well, or 3/4 of a CDU for this presentation, and so on. So if you have any questions about certifications and claiming credit for this presentation, please email sales@procept.com. It's on your screen, sales@procept.com, and we'll be able to help you. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Bye for now.